now I'm going to get sick.
No, don't say that.
Whereas one of my teachers took it is that my car will be going away. She used a car analogy, saying like how everyone's car was missing and stolen.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I'm confused.
C++?
I had her for one day.
Okay, yeah. I'm pretty sure she teaches that class, yeah. She used a car analogy.
For what?
For people getting sick.
Oh, I see. We've got people everywhere. See what I can do.
Thankfully it's warmer outside today. Shouldn't have gotten hurt.
Morning, everybody. I'm counting. Let's see. Don, Garrett, Matt, and Ethan absent. So let me know if any of you are here and I missed you. Happy day doing SQL code. Let's see. Hope your weeks have been good.
Just a little tired.
A little tired.
I think probably everybody is.
I think so. Feeling a little worn out, that's for sure. I'm glad we have a week off for Thanksgiving, but I think fall break was important and I missed it. Oh, something's good on my externals, not showing it. There. Yep, full week off. That'll be nice. Hang on, I've got to get a couple OneNote documents open. My external drive is not cooperating. My cable's been acting weird. Probably had to replace it. Okay, we were working last time on our Cengage problems, and we saw they are all mixed up. So we have a huge ton of them. It would be nice if I could resort them so we could do like all the easy ones first, and then all of the ones that have counts and things like that second. But at this point with the Cengage software, I can't do that. So that's why we kind of have a big mixture. So let's start out this morning. Let me share my screen. Start out this morning using SQL Server Management Studio, Smith, SSMS. I'm going to get logged on here. And I'm going to do some practice queries that do some summary type statements while I'm getting my samples found. Since the external's not working, in case you didn't hear me, will you guys go ahead and see if you can run the scripts you're provided in the Chapter 7 data files that create the other 3 tables. So you would go to your database and open the script, like to create the large co, and run that. Let's see if you can get those run while I'm getting my stuff found here. I've got stuff. Well, I connected to my database server for CIS151. So I'm going to disconnect just in case you do that. You don't have to close out of the management studio altogether. You can disconnect, and then on your file menu can do connect and change the server that you're connected to. So if you did that like I did, you don't have to restart. Anybody having any luck? My files are not accessible, so if I want to get them again, just kind of review with everybody, I can go to Cengage. And I can download those student data files. For chapter 7. Then I'm going to extract them. So we created our construction company database already. So I'm going to create this fact one. I want the SQL file. So with the SQL file, if you remember, we renamed it to be a .SQL file because SQL Server Management Studio recognizes that file type. I can open it as a text file. I'll just edit it with Notepad++. And I can just Control A to copy everything, Control C to copy everything, Control A to select, right? And then I can go to SQL Server Management Studio and choose New Query and paste. Now I want to create these tables in my database. So up at the top, I'm going to make sure and put that use statement to use my database. And I have to say go to actually make the server execute that use command. And then I can go through and create all of these tables. Now this database, all of these ones that we're creating are our kind of our sandbox area. They're our playground. We can do whatever we want with them. And if something goes wrong, we can just come in and drop all of these tables so that they're gone and just create them again. So that's why it's nice for us to have these script code chunks, SQL scripts, so that we can do that and just recreate our sandbox. I'm going to go ahead and execute this. And I should be able to see that I have new tables. So now, in addition to the invoice and product and other tables that I had from the construct code database, now I have my author, book, and checkout tables from this database. All right, so that's one. Now I need to create these other ones too. So that's my fact or my library database. Let's create the large co. Is everybody okay? Were you able to create that all right?
Yeah.
Everybody at home got it created? They're good. Okay, so now I want large co. I'll do a new query. Paste it. Next time I'll put the use statement in first before I paste, huh? And go. And then I'll execute the query. It's like stuck.
A lot of data.
I don't know that it's that much data. We're going to see what happens as everybody's just hanging. It finally got done. So we stressed out our little Amazon web server there with all of us doing all of those massive inserts together. That's all right. It can handle it. Let's refresh our tables. And we should see all our large company tables. One more. Sailco. So I'm going to open my new query. And let's see if we can bring it to its knees again. Oh, that one went super fast. I like it when we can actually stress out our little web server. Amazon. Talk. Okay, do we have everybody? I'm not sure if that last one is showing up for me yet. Or employees and things. It looks like it's there in my table. So I think everything ran okay. Now we already have these queries saved, these scripts, because we've got them from our data files. So you don't need to save those. Yours is showing errors. Oh, sure. To get the tables to show, Chelsea, just click on your tables and click the refresh button. And sometimes it won't update very well. We've actually had situations where we had to close out of the tool and reopen it. Are you still having errors, Charles? Okay.
I think I'm having errors with the large code, MySQL file.
What's it doing to you?
It's just saying some syntax was wrong, even though I like copied the entire file.
Let me make sure I didn't get any sort of error down in there somewhere because I didn't scroll through it all. I think it was okay. Can you share yours? See if we can tell what's going on.
They copied it in, pasted it in.
So let me see the error. Can you zoom in on an error? So you need to let's find that word start. So Control F, just like any other Windows utility, and find start. You might have to click up in the top so that your find is working. The top window where the code is.
Oh, here?
Yeah, because we want to search for the word start in the code. I don't need to find it in the error messages. So why does it say?
Go up. Try changing the direction to down.
Yeah.
I don't think it's in there. I think you should open a new query window and paste it in again and try it again.
Okay.
Or see if your tables actually got created already.
Nice.
Because sometimes, you know, if it actually ran and the refresh just isn't working. See if you have them. No, it doesn't look like it did.
I'll try to open it up again.
So we are using SQL, not MySQL.
Oh, maybe that's why.
That's probably why. That's why we need to watch you. We did fact large co, and then what's that third one? Sailco. Yeah, Sailco. Thank you, Isaac, because that's an easy mistake to make. So It's so similar of syntax. There's just really teeny differences. So we wouldn't even notice them. Okay, so we have a bunch of tables. We can use them like in our sandbox, like I say, to test, play with, do whatever we want. But we're going to use, a lot of our queries today are going to go against the AP database again, so that we can do some practicing there. Today we're going to look at some summary queries. So I'll Google a summary report and find some images and show you a couple. So oftentimes when we're working with a company, they'd like to see information at a summary level. So in this example here, we're looking at customers, and if I can zoom in a little bit more, how many purchases we have here of our betaware and this Barrow Holdings. And so our database had a whole bunch of rows with all of this data, pieces of information, all of the different customers that have bought betaware and all of the different customers that have bought into Barrow Holdings and all of those kinds of things. And the query to generate this data needed to summarize all that information, to sum it all up so that it would be meaningful. So the same way as our GPA sums up all of our grades and does some calculations on them, we can do summary queries that'll help us look at things in a summary level, a total. We did that last time, so we've done a few already, but we didn't really get a chance to talk about them and how the syntax works. Whenever we're doing summary type queries, we have these aggregate functions available in SQL. And aggregate means that it works on everything, or it works to summarize everything. The ones we used last time, I think we used count and we used sum. We also used the round function last time, but it was not an aggregate function because it worked on individual rows or a total function. So round didn't care. But what aggregate functions do is they're built to process many rows and accumulate them. So the functions that we have available that we'll use often are AVG to do an average, sum to add up all of the rows, minimum to find the minimum row, maximum to find the maximum. We saw the count parameter just counts how many rows we process, and so it can be really, really helpful too. So let's try this query here. We're going to do a query. Let me find my Management Studio. So I'm going to open a new query, and I want to use the AP database. And for this query, we're going to count our unpaid invoices and calculate the total due. This is a summary query. Just get all of our terms there in our query with us. So to count how many invoices are unpaid, we're going to do a count. And mentioned last time, when we want to just count every single row, we don't really care about what level we're counting at. We can just use the star to say count everything. Now in this query, I want to build my from clause before I finish my column list. I'm going to say from invoices, because that's going to help with building the IntelliSense list. We don't need to do any joins for this query or anything because we're just looking at our unpaid invoices. I'm going to bring up that entity relationship diagram for our database. And when we're looking at our invoices, we've got the invoice ID and vendor ID, invoice number, when the invoice was generated, the total amount due for the invoice, and how much they've paid, how much credit we gave them, and then a couple of other dates. So those are the columns that we have on our invoice table. Besides getting a count of unpaid invoices then, we need to get a sum. Our sum is going to take that invoice total, which we said was the total amount due for the invoice, the payment total, which is how much the customer is paid, and we're also going to subtract the credit total. The number that results from that subtraction calculation is how much is due still on this invoice. So we're going to call that total due. Our count, we can give it a synonym. Let's do that too, because otherwise it'll just say count in the heading. Let's set our count as number of invoices. Now we have our from clause, but we saw last time when working with the AP database that oftentimes we need to use this calculation in our where clause. So I'm going to copy it. And we only want to get those invoices that still have a balance due. So where that result is greater than 0. So let's run that. So because this was a summary query, we only get one line of output. The one line of output is the count of all of those invoices that have outstanding balances. And then the sum is the total amount due of all of those invoices that have outstanding balances. We added this where clause to not include these invoices that have already been paid. Let's comment that out and see what happens if we don't include it. Right now, remember we're looking at 11 invoices and about $32,000. So I'm going to execute it now without the where clause. And we'll see we still have the same amount due, right? 32,000, because the way that calculation works, we're going to have the same amount due because these all come out to 0. But now the number of invoices is really incorrect. So we have to be super careful when we're creating queries that we're providing the correct information. Because if we ran through and said, well, our total amount due should come out to about 32,000, and as a report SQL expert person in our company, we generate this query and hand it off to somebody, we could be giving them some bad information. So we have to make sure that all of the data we're producing is accurate. Sometimes that involves us doing other select statements to be sure. So what could we do? We could select everything from our invoices just look at the data to be sure, or we could select all of the invoices where this amount is equal to 0 to see how many invoices had been paid. Lots of different ways we could approach it looking at our data. Let's save that one. So we'll call this summary unpaid invoices count. Now let's do another query. And in this one, we're going to select from our AP database again. We would like to have a summary query with a count, an average, and a sum of all, let's see, of all of our invoices dated after 9/1/2015. So this will be a summary or aggregate query. And again, with this one, we should only return one row because we're going to be selecting a summary information. Now we want to get this from our invoices. So what we want to select, we can actually add a new column to our output, and this will be a column that shows up in every row. So it's not really a heading, it's more of like a sidebar. So we want this output after 9/1/2015, and we want to call this selection date. If we were doing some programming and setting things up, we might be able to set that up as a variable or something where we would include that column in our output. After adding this column, we'd like to have a count of all of the invoices that are dated after 9/1. Oops, and we want to name that number of invoices. The next thing that we would like to have is that average. Now, the average is not like the count. With the count, we can just put the star in there and say, count them all, count them all. It doesn't matter. Well, with the average, we have to actually supply a column name, a numeric column that we want to be used in this average calculation. And we want to use our invoice total. We're going to call that column average invoice amount. And then finally, we want a sum of that invoice total to show up to. And we'll call that total invoice amount. Now, our big deal here is we have to have our where clause set to get the right invoices where the invoice date is greater than that 2015 date. And we could do some querying online or Googling if we weren't sure how to enter that date to use it in our where clause. SQL is going to be pretty flexible with us. It's going to let us enter it in a lot of different formats. Now let's see what we get there. Let's execute it. So we've got 114 invoices that were generated after this date. This is our average invoice amount. We should round that, I guess. So on our average, let's add that round.
Isn't 114 all of the invoices?
Let's check. If it is, we should change our date, huh? So we can check really easy. Let's open a new query window and just select all of our invoices. Yep, we've got 114 rows. So that's every single one. Let's check our dates here. I think we could use a 2016 date and get a better result. Let's do that. I'm going to change my heading here. Let's see if we have any after 1/1/2016. Now we should be limiting our output a little better. So got rid of a few. So everybody's okay? Does it work? Good, let's save it. Again, we'll say summary, dated invoices, count, average, and sum. You can find those examples later. Let's copy this one because our next one we're going to do is very similar. Get everything here, copy it, and open a new query window and paste. So for this query, we would like to get a count and the minimum and maximum So we want the count, the minimum, and the maximum of all invoices dated after. I'm going to make that be 1/1/2016 since we changed that. So this again will be a summary query, and we don't really need to change too much here. We don't need the round function anymore because we won't be calculating that average. Instead of calculating the average, we'll use the max function, and we'll change our heading to say highest invoice total. And then on our sum line, we'll change it to use the min function and say this is the lowest invoice total. So it's not too bad using these aggregate functions. You can kind of think of it as working in Excel and working with the whole column. You know, if I'm going to do the sum function, I'm going to get a sum of that whole column. Only in this example, we don't see the data that was used to produce that sum. Like in Excel, it's going to be sitting there. Here, we don't see it. It was processed, and all we see is the final result. So it's pretty standard that way. Okay, let's save that one. And we'll say that it's account and min and max. So that's all good. We've been using all these wonderful numeric things that cooperate and play nice with summary queries. We could also do that same thing with alpha data or string data. So in this query, we're going to select the min and max of an alpha column. So we can still use the same aggregate functions, but we have to be careful because, you know, I can't summarize necessarily string things, but I can find the minimum and the maximum of them. So we can use our select clause. And in this example, we're going to be selecting from our vendors table. Our vendors table just has information about this company that we buy things from. So their name and address, phone number, contact information. That's the main things that we see on our vendor table. So I want to select, first of all, the minimum vendor name as first vendor. and then the maximum vendor name as last vendor. And let's go ahead and count them. Now, in this case, we're going to do a count of all of the different vendor names that are processed as number of vendors. My as is got lowercase, add me. So I can use the star to say count all rows, or if I want to in my count function, I can get really specific and say count all occurrences of a vendor name. Now there's a thing there. What if I worked with 2 different IBM offices? I might have a vendor name that is a duplicate. So maybe I don't want to count it twice. I could have, you know, IBM here that's in this location and IBM that's in another location. So we'll see if that's an issue. It says we have 122 vendors. Let's see if our count was impacted by any duplicate names. I'm going to open a new query and just use AP and select all of the information from our vendors table to see. I got 122 rows and our count came out 122. So it would have come out exactly the same if we had a star there. But we can use that column name to be safe if we want to make sure that we're only counting unique ones. Everybody good on that one? Let's save it. Yes, sir.
So you named them first and last vendor, but they seem to be ordered by alphabet.
Uh-huh.
Date. Okay.
Right, so it's giving you like your A to Z sort.
Right.
So it would be the first vendor in an alphabetical list. So you wouldn't see that very often, I don't think, but it's possible. So we'll just say that summary alpha data. Now in this one, we're going to count, and it is going to matter. We do want to make sure that we're not counting something more than once. Let me get our use statement in. So for this example, what we want to get is a count of all of our vendors. Their number of invoices. Their average invoice amount. And their total invoice amount. So in this example, we don't want to have just one line of output. We want to have one line of output for every vendor. So this aggregate query should produce one row for each vendor. So I should see vendor number 1, 5 invoices, $57 is my average, 150 whatever is my total. So this one's a little different. Now we're going to be looking at the vendor number and other data from that vendor table besides just those calculated fields. So this data is going to come from our invoices table. We don't need to do any sort of joins or anything because it's all available from that one table. But I want to have a count of the total number of invoices, but I want that count to be based on the vendor ID. So we have two different counts here. The first one is going to count how many different vendor IDs are there. The next one is going to count how many times do you see this individual vendor ID. We also want to get an average invoice amount, and a sum. Let's limit it a little bit, and we'll say where invoice date greater than our 2016-0101. So we don't get every single invoice that we have. So our first count, since we're saying count how many distinct vendor IDs you see, that's going to tell us how many different vendors total have had invoices. The next count is going to count how many times we see each vendor ID. How many rows does this vendor ID occur in? So notice the difference between those counts. They both are working with the vendor ID field, but the first one is like saying, eliminate the duplicates and tell me how many are left. This count is saying, how many do you see for this specific value of vendor ID? Based on that specific value, I'm going to get an average and a sum. Let's run this. Well, I lied. I said we were going to get more than one row. That's coming, I promise. This one, we were still doing a massive summary query, and we're getting, I'm going to change this comment, just say one row. So in our massive query, we're saying we have 32 different unique vendors. Of those vendors, we see 100 invoices, and this is the average invoice amount of those invoices, and this is the total amount of those invoices. I'll go ahead and round that average. That should look better. Oops, I keep leaving out the, like, don't you know what I want? It doesn't. That looks better. Save that one. We'll say this is vendors by invoice because we're kind of getting that information of how many vendors there are by invoices. Whenever we're grouping now, sometimes we do want more than one line of output. Sometimes we want what I was talking about, where we have a row of output for every vendor. And we can do that by adding the group by clause into our summary query. And the group by clause would say things like that, like group this output by the unique vendor ID so that we can have a line of output per vendor. So let's try some that have that group by clause. I'm going to create a new one. Everybody doing okay? Not getting queried out yet? Let me know if you're dying here. Okay, this is going to be an aggregate query that returns one row per vendor. Each row will have the vendor ID and their average invoice amount. So this is going to be from our invoices table. And the columns that we want to appear on our output are our vendor ID and our average invoice total. We want that invoice total to be named average invoice amount. Now, the reason that last query we did only came out with one line of code of output was because we didn't have a group by clause. When we add a group by clause, we're saying, I would like you to group this output by this individual column so that I can see output having to do with each unique value you encounter in this column. Let's run this like this so you can see the output. Now, I have some output here. Here's my different vendors. Everything looks good, but I can actually change things a little bit because our user said they would like to know how much these vendors owe. So that's what we're trying to figure out, or how much we owe them. So we'd like to add an order by clause. When I have a group by, it has to come right after my from clause. So notice that my order by still has to come after it. We want to order this thing by that average invoice amount. We want it to be descending because we want the big ones to come to the top. In the order by clause, I was able to use this synonym average invoice amount that we'd assign to this average. Okay. So now if I run it, I should see that my order is different. These guys that we owe the most are coming up to the top like I wanted in my sort. They like that. They come back and they say, well, you know, I like this, but I don't want to see all of these extra ones that have such a small amount. They're just kind of distracting. So can we limit this report down to just the ones where our total is over 2,000? Well, we can. We can add a halving clause. Now the halving goes with the group by. So it's going to have to come right after the group by clause. And we can say, I only want to see those vendors that have that average invoice total greater than 2,000. So let's run that and see how we limit the selection down. So the halving clause is just like a where. So this is like a where clause, only on our summary.
So we can call the average invoice amount in order by, but we can't call it in the halving?
Try it. Isn't it weird? It just like makes it kind of awkward. I'm going to put some hyphens to comment that out. Because, yeah, it's just so inconsistent.
I hate that.
Isn't it awful?
It's a variable. Why can't I call it?
It's very, very inconsistent. And it has to do with the way your query is processed. So the way the way the system is taking care of things, when we look at this query, we start out by selecting all of the invoices, right? So we have this big kind of interim spreadsheet or table of all of the invoices, just their vendor IDs and their invoice total, because those are the only things in our select statement. So we have this big giant in-memory list of those. The database management system then sorts everything by vendor ID so that it can make sure that they're all in order, and then it can walk through and add those things up. And it doesn't use the order by clause until after it's done that initial processing. So at that point, the temporary interim table actually has this column. But the first pass, when we're doing this grouping, it doesn't have that column yet. We're still grouping on the original columns that were in our select statement. So if you can kind of visualize the order that the database management system is doing it, it does make sense that you have to really, really visualize it. So when I first start out, I only have these two columns. I have all of them. I sort by vendor, and then when I accumulate everything, group it by vendor ID. Now I also have this column available because it was part of that grouping that produced this column. So my where clause and my order by clauses can see that column because it now exists by the time I'm doing this final sort to output the data to the user. Because interim, internally, as this was being processed, the system had to sort it by vendor ID, right? Because that's what it had to do to produce these output results. So there was a lot of things that happened in memory as the database was handling this data.
So can we put a where clause after the order by?
We could, and we can try using where clauses, and sometimes you can use a where clause instead of the having clause. Is it not? I think it'll let us.
Does it have to be before the order by?
Let's check. I don't think so. Let me look at this. I think they're going to show us. Hang on. Let me find an example. The where has to go before or group by,
That's so annoying. So no, you can't use the where.
so it's not going to work then. No, because again, it's too early in our process.
Right, and then if you use a where before the group by, it gets grouped after.
After, yeah, because I wasn't thinking about where that where clause is actually
It doesn't
applied.
matter, but you still don't get the result that I was wanting.
Mhm. But it's definitely an interesting conundrum that you can get to those things, those variables that you're creating on certain clauses, but not others. I'm going to put my having clause back in. Make sure I didn't mess it up too bad before we save it. I think that looks pretty good. So I kind of have it separated into the different sections here. We have our select statement and our from clause that we know have to go together. And then our group by and our having have to go together. And then of course our order by is just at the end, because as you can visualize, that's the last thing that's happening as it's processing our query. So we can do one that has a where clause though. Hang on, we'll get to one in just a minute. I don't want to skip too many or we'll miss content. All right, let's save this one. Group by vendor ID. Now in our next one, we want to do the same type thing. We want, however, to count how many invoices a vendor has. We're going to get this from our invoices table. So we're going to select vendor ID and account. And again, we're going to, now I'm going to try this without putting in the group by clause, so I want you to see what happens, what kind of error we get. We're saying we want to do a summary query because we have this count function in our column list. So because we have that aggregate function in our column list, SQL decides we want to do a summary query. If we run it, it says vendor ID is not a summary thing. You're not telling me to do anything with it to make it into a summary column. So what do you want me to do with that? So we have to tell it, go ahead and use it to group by. And then the DBMS can tell, I see, you would like me to count for each of those unique instances of that vendor ID and use it to group. So this one's a nice, simple one, really common, something that you would do often. Let's save it. So that summary group by with our count, that does really good. One more. Here we're going to select some addressing information along with our invoice information. So we're going to do a join on our invoice to our vendor table because we want to know how many invoices and how much money we have owed by city and state. So how many invoices and how much debt by city and state. So our from clause for this one, we're going to be getting information from our vendor, but basically we're doing a report on our invoices. So our invoice is going to be our primary table in our join, and we want to join our vendors table to it. And of course, we want them to be joined on that vendor ID. So now I can do my select statement. I'll build it. First of all, I want to see what state the vendor is in, and I want to see what city the vendor is in, and I would like a count of how many vendors I have in that city, state, or no, how many invoices. So we're going to call this invoice quantity. I would like to calculate an average of the invoice total for each city and state. Now, if I try to run this way, I'm going to get that same error about trying to use aggregate functions along with columns that aren't in an aggregate state, because my vendor state and vendor city are not accumulated or summarized columns in any way. So to make the system be able to handle that, I need to add them in the group by clause. So after our join, we're going to say, well, I'd like that to be grouped, but I'd like it to be grouped by vendor state and vendor city. So now each of those are going to be a separate group. I'd also like to order my output by vendor state and vendor city. Now when we run, we should just see a summary. So for each state and city. So we do a lot of business in Fresno. We can tell, got a lot going on there. Great, great, great. I think that is a good spot for us to switch to our Cengage and get that assignment done. Let's save this. I'll say summary vendor invoices by city and state. Lots of examples. Yay. Okay, let's see if we can get this Engage thing done. I think I got due dates updated everywhere, but it just keeps ignoring me. Yes, I would like to. So I'm going to go find our coding section. So right here, it's showing the right due date to me. So it was nice and kept our stuff. I thought it did, but then I'm sitting here starting to have a little bit of panic thinking, oh no, what if it didn't? So we had quite a bit done. Problem 14, that's what I have marked, and it's got that one, and that's where we are. Now, we talked a little bit last time about you guys saving these queries, and I would recommend that you save them outside of Cengage so that you have some sort of backup or something to happen. And that would be a really good practice as a database administrator, that you would get used to doing that kind of thing. So just like we're saving the examples we're doing in SQL Server Management Studio, you want to come up with some sort of rhyme or reason. Now you might just want one big text document that you keep all of the problems in, you know, for this whole assignment. That's fine. You could keep them separate however you want to do it, but I would recommend you keep them somehow. Okay, for problem 14 here, we are looking at modifying the query in problem 13. And our query in problem 13, let's go back and review because it's been a little while. We displayed the customer code, balance, and total purchases for each customer. So we actually had done a group by with an order by, and we were selecting the customer code, a total for the customer balance, and a sum of the line units times line price as their total purchases. So that's what we had gotten or generated for that query. And of course, we were kind of just looking at the answers. We haven't had a chance to practice on those summary queries yet, but hopefully this one makes more sense to you now as you look at it and you see what it does. We did do a couple of those that we weren't quite prepared for. So in 14, we want to modify that one to include the number of individual product purchases made by each customer. In other words, if the customer's invoice is based on 3 products, 1 per line item, you count 3 product purchases. Note that in the original invoice data, customer 10011 generated 3 invoices, which contained a total of 6 lines, each representing a product purchase. So your output values should match those shown in the figure. So in our select statement, we already have our customer code, our customer balance, and our total purchases. And we already have our join in place in our group by and our order by. So we just need to add another column to our select column list. So they want to count the number of purchases. So which function should we use? Oh, you're so right. We should use count. And all we have to add is count star, each row that I see as, and they want this to be named number of purchases. That looks right.
You have a space in between your own.
Do you think it's going to complain to me? Is it that picky? Sorry, I just got help it. Love those new students. It's so picky. It is. If I got it right, you guys don't need my help. That's awesome. I don't want you to need my help. Problem 15. Use a query to compute the total of all purchases, the number of purchases, and the average purchase amount made by each customer. Your output values must match the blah, blah, blah. Okay, sort by customer code. So we are doing that already. Customer code, customer balance, total purchases, number of purchases. Now we need to add in that average purchase amount. And I bet they're going to want us to round that, huh? So we're going to round that average. So our average purchase amount is going to be that calculation, that line units times the line price. So we're going to have to repeat that calculation. And I want to round that by 2 decimal places. And we want to call that average purchase amount. And that's up there. That looks good. I just got it. Woohoo! Okay, number 16, we're going off and looking at our invoice table. We want a query to produce the total purchase per invoice, generating the result sorted by invoice number. The invoice total is the sum of the product purchases in the line that corresponds to the invoice. So it sounds like we might have to look at our tables here real quick. They say we just can look at this line table and we should be able to get our invoice number off that and the units times the price. So we'll be able to get all that data from that line table. So let's start here with our select from our line. Oh, can you show us? Let's see.
Yeah, I did that.
Does she see it? Yay. Good job. So we've got our from line here, and all we need is our invoice number and a sum of that calculation line units times line price. Now we have to do a couple of other things here. I'm going to go ahead and run it just to test it. Oh, missing a group by. So what do I want to group by here? I always want to group by the things that are not being used in an aggregate function. So I would want to group by invoice number. Now I think we needed to, do we need to sort? Yep, sorted by invoice number. Okay, so I'm going to try that again. That looks good. I obviously need to round. Beautiful.
You need to name it.
Oh, I didn't name it. I don't want to name it. Thank you.
Hold on, before you delete yours, I need to figure out why mine's wrong.
Okay.
Oh,
Do you see it?
yeah, I need to quote the name.
You get it? Everybody got it? Okay, 17. And it looks like going through these that a lot of the rest of them are going to be using the same data as this one. So we do have hope of getting them all done. Yay. For 17, we want to use a query. Yours is, she's not hope. She's got no hope. Okay, let me stop. Okay, Mary, show us what you got. Not that you're hopeless, just that we're running out of hope. All right. INV underscore number and field list. Is there 2 underscores? No. In your select statement too.
He doesn't like you.
Is that it? Yay. All right. So for 17, we're going to go back to some information about our customers. And we want to show information about the invoices and the invoice totals. I'm going to double check, but I think we can just go. No, we're going to have to get a join going here. So we're going to have to look at our invoice table and our line table because we want that customer code off our invoice table. And then we want that units and price value off of our line table. So we will have to do a join. So let's start out by clearing out some of this other stuff. And in our from clause, we're going to start with our invoice. And we want to join that to our line table on invoice number equal to line invoice number. So that's our join clause. So in our select statement, we're going to start out with our cuss code. And then we need our invoice number. And a sum of that invoice total, which is our line underscore units times our line underscore price. I'll go ahead and average or round that, I mean. Now, right away, we know that we're going to get an error about these non-aggregate columns. So we're going to need to group by, and we're going to have to group by both of them, cuss code and invoice number. Now, we could use our invoice number from our line table or our invoice table. We should see fewer of them on our invoice table, fewer invoices than line items. So we'll choose our invoice. I'm going to run this one. In my select statement, it's still not able to determine which invoice number. So I'll clarify that by specifying the invoice table. And I better give my calculated field a name, invoice total. Okay, I've got customer code, invoice number, invoice total. Everything looks great. Okay. So for 18, we're not too far off from this one. We want to know for a given customer how many invoices they have and their total customer purchases. So I think that we should just be able to replace our invoice number column here with that count. They want to know how many invoices there were, so I'm actually going to tell it to count on that invoice number. And because we don't want to count all of our line items, sorry, they've got something really weird in here. What am I looking at? I'm going to go ahead and use the distinct keyword. So here I am saying I want to count how many unique invoices this customer has. Let's add a column header to that, and we will name that count of, we want it to be number of invoices, not count of. And then instead of invoice total on that next column, they want to name it total customer purchases. It's still the same summary data. They just want to give it a different column name. In this query, I got rid of our invoice number from our column list. So I'll remove it from our group by clause. And they do want this to be sorted by customer code. So let's add our order by. Woohoo, do I match? Let's see, I've got the right headings, the right data, I think. Yay. Okay, then for 19 now, this one is pretty interesting. They say we want to write a query to generate the total number of invoices, the invoice total for all of the invoices, the smallest of the customer purchase amounts, the largest of the customer purchase amounts, and the average of all the customer purchase amounts. Okay, so we want to start out that this is totally going to be an aggregate query. This one, number 19, we are not ready to do yet. Looking at the examples that we've done, we're going to skip it. So let's go to 20. We'll do 19 on another day, or we will just lower our total points for this one because that one belongs in a different set, a little more complicated set. So number 20, let's list the balances of customers who have made purchases during the current invoice cycle. That is, customers who appear in the invoice table. Sort the results by customer code. Okay, in this one, we're wanting to know our customer, which we have. But if we look at our tables, we've got our customer here that has our balance. The thing is, we don't need any data off of our invoice table, but they say that the invoice table entry has to exist for it to be an active customer. So we're going to include that in our from clause so that we only get customers that actually have invoices. So it's a little bit unusual, a little bit different than anything that we've done. Let's go ahead and put this in, and I'll show you how we want it to work. First of all, in our from clause, we're going to say that we're going to start with our customer table. But we're going to join our invoice table on our customer.cuscode being equal to our invoice.cuscode. So that's going to give us only customers that actually have an entry in the invoice table. Because if they don't have an entry, we wouldn't be able to do that join. We wouldn't get any data. So now that we've got that from clause in there, what do we want? Well, we want to know something about each customer. So we could select a distinct cuscode. But I better tell it which table. Customer. And then for each customer, we can just show their balance. Now I do need to add an order by to this one because they do want it sorted. Is it already? Because we are looking at them by customers and doing our joins, so it should be. So this one is here in our aggregate query section. It seems like we should be doing a sum or something, but we don't need to because this data is already available on the customer table. The join is making sure that the invoice actually exists for that customer. So our data, I think, looks good. Anything else that I need to do? I think we're good. So for 21, it's not very different. Here we're saying we want a summary of customer balance characteristics for customers who made purchases. So we already have figured out if we can join them to the invoice table, they've made purchases. But we want to include the minimum balance, maximum balance, average balance. So instead of showing our customer code, we want to select our minimum, cost balance, as minimum balance, we want to select our maximum cost balance as maximum, and the average as average balance. And then they're not asking us to sort this one. Like Jess said, it should come out in customer order anyways because of that join. Let's try it. Need to round that average. Minimum is 0, balance, max is 385, 345.86. Average is 70. That looks good. This one is very close, isn't it? They want the balance characteristics, including the total. So let's see, we've got our average, our maximum, our minimum. We just need to add our total. That should be all we need to add. Oh, this time they want all customers. Before, we were only looking at customers that had current sales. Remember, we said it was that join that was allowing us to limit that. So we need to eliminate the join. $2,089.28.0. So notice they just did that really slyly for all customers instead of customers who made purchases. Very, very detail oriented.
Now they want the opposite though.
You right?
Now they want the opposite.
The opposite? I don't know why it's not. Create a query to find the balance characteristics.
Mine worked. Oh, you didn't name your total.
I was just like, what's wrong?
If you click the arrow with the one on it,
Uh-huh.
down to the bottom,
It'll tell me.
it'll tell you exactly what's wrong.
Thank you.
What did you just do?
Why does it want it named that?
No.
Oh, it wants a total balance. I see. I was looking at what I had, not what it wanted. I was going to give it what I had. It's like better. Yay. You'll make me a Cengage person, whether I want to be or not. Okay, 23. Find the listing of customers who did not make purchases during the invoicing period. Sort the results by customer code. Your output must match. All right, so let's see what we're looking at here. Now, this one is going to do a subquery. So a subquery is a query that contains another query. And I use the secondary query to be like input into the first query for what my selection should be. So we'll go ahead and do this one, even though it's a little ahead of what we've looked at. But next time we'll be looking at doing these subqueries, so we'll get a little experience. So kind of like our group buys and our aggregate queries we did last time, we'll go ahead and put this one in. So for this one, our output is going to be our customer code and our customer balance. So I'll go ahead and put those in my select statement. I know I'm going to need the customer code and the customer balance. From my customer. Now, what we're going to do here, we want to find customers that don't have any rows in our invoice table, because they said if a customer has a row in an invoice table, they have current sales. So if they don't have a row in that invoice table, they don't have current sales, and those are the ones we want to find. So the only way we can find those is by using a subquery. So in our where clause, we can say, I want you to find all of the customers where their customer code is not in the results of this subquery. And my subquery is going to select cus code from invoice. So in this subquery,
You're making a query inside the query?
yeah, query inside of a query. It's like a nested query. So we're going to run, what's going to happen is it's going to run this nested query first, and it's going to come up with a list of all of the customers that have invoices, every single one. Then we're going to be using that list in our where clause of our outer query. And for every customer that we get, we're going to look through that entire list and make sure they're not in that list. If they are, we'll throw them out. We don't want them in our query. But if we can't find them, we're going to keep them for our output. So that should be everything we need, except that we want to order it by customer code. So this is a really standard reason to do a subquery, where we want to make sure we're finding something that's not in something else. It's hard for us to find things that don't exist as programmers, so we have to have special ways. All right, that looks good. I think we're all matched up here with everything. Yay, so we'll look at those next week. More, the subqueries. We have, how many more? Oh, a couple more. So for 24, find the customer balance summary for all customers who have not made purchases during the current invoicing period. So again, we're looking at this subquery that we've already built. So now we're going to be able to just select all of those summarized things. So I want a sum of the customer balance. the minimum customer balance. And that's going to be as minimum balance. Our first one is going to be as total balance. And finally, our average. And that's going to be named average balance. This one for number 24 does not need the order by clause. So I'll get rid of that. So remember, it's our subquery that's meeting our conditions to make sure that they don't have any current invoices. They haven't been active. And then we're getting our total, 1526.0. Looks good. Okay, 25 and 26 are working with our product table. Our product table has information about the products that we buy or sell. Product code, description, when we last purchased some, I think, quantity on hand, how many is our minimum where we'd want to kick off a new order, the price, the discount, different things like that about each of our products. So here's a nice display that lists all of our different products, and they would like this query to summarize the value of products currently in inventory. So the value of a product is going to be its price times how many we have, our quantity on hand. So that should give us a good total. And we want to sum that up. Oops. For each of our products. So let's get started here on this one. I want to select, my from clause is going to be my products table. The data that I want is going to be our product description. And our quantity on hand and our price. And then our subtotal is going to be the quantity on hand times our price. And we want to sort this by that subtotal. So this one isn't really so much of a summary query. They kind of say, they kind of try implying that it is. Let's run it and see if we're getting the output. Products doesn't exist. Should it be product? Oh, sorry, it's product. That's better. So I've got my chainsaw, 11 of them, all that looks good. So this was actually a pretty simple query compared to the summary queries we've been doing, but they put that word summary in it, made it sound like we needed to have some sort of aggregate function, and we really didn't need it at all. Last one, total value of inventory. So this one is going to be,
Mine's not working.
oh, okay. Let's see what's going on.
No. Well, go back to your other one.
Oh, okay.
It was correct.
Sorry. Ah.
Oh, okay. It autofilled something I didn't want to do.
Oh, it did?
Too helpful. Unhelpfully helpful later.
It's being helpful. Helpful day, helpful day.
Like I said,
Yay. Okay, so this last one, we've got it. All we need is to get rid of all of these and do a sum. Not formula, right? And we need it to say, for a heading, total value of inventory. We shouldn't need anything else. We don't need to order by. That looks good. Okay, be happy with your results. That one we skipped, I'll take it off of our points and we'll make sure that we look at something like it in our examples. So 19 is bringing it down a little bit. That's all right.
If we already like submitted this yesterday. okay,
It
well,
doesn't show anybody having submitted it. So I don't know what it did. Because I went in and I was gonna like unsubmit them, but it showed one person has them all done, has had them all done for a while. That obviously knows what they're doing already. But I think it was okay. So it should have taken all of yours. Let me know if it didn't. We don't have just a couple of minutes. We have a really important thing to do. Our people that are at home will miss out. A lot of you guys know about this already. But you know the rubber duck debugging thing?
Yeah.
To debug with rubber ducks, right? Well, so with SQL, it's like, should you guys have rubber ducks? Do you need them? You saw today, you do a lot of debugging, don't you? With SQL code. You've got to look at the data and figure out if things are right, and you've got to make sure that everything's the way it should be. So I think SQL programmers should have rubber ducks.
confused as to why we wouldn't be able to do 19.
Oh, just because it's too yucky for where we are right now. But we have to put some code in there that we haven't talked about at all.
Not really seem like it.
I know, it doesn't. But yet it's just really awful. It doesn't seem like it should be. See if you can get it with code that we have. Because I don't know if they're just overly complicating it. Here, I'm gonna rubber gloves and rubber ducks. Come get one and I get out of here. And have a great weekend.
It seems like you're merging your invoice customer.
It doesn't give me the newest stuff.
It won't give you.
Yeah, so I've got all the code looking down, it's just.
yeah, I think that's what's happening to me too.
You can go.
Okay.
Okay, here's some. Yes, one, don't touch a bunch. Because remember, they're dirty.
Oh, shit, sorry.
Uh-huh. don't know, we'll have to look.
This way,
and see what it does. Sure. It's a separate assignment. So it's okay if you already submitted it. Usually says, the more you did it, I'll have to consider it separate.
But I kept all of them commented out.
Because I'd have to look at it.
I didn't mind the people that did actually
I submitted it.
submitted it.
No, it shows nobody had submitted it.
No, I
One
mean like
person
the
submitted.
last name.
Yeah. It shows they had it. What was yours?
It just doesn't give me the other, the assignment that we did today.
It's this one.
Your
Join. You should have just submitted it.
customer. I submitted it last time.
Before I guess
Yeah, but I did. When I went in there, it didn't show anybody had submitted it. And I thought you guys had. I'm not sure what
Matt,
it is.
I wanna do
But
this.
all they put those are out there, so don't worry about it.
Yep, I luckily didn't.
You're selecting.
Yeah, as long as you got it, we'll find it, because I'm kind of learning what it does too.
I guess I just put in all these entries.
Works. Yes.
Yeah, I don't really want to keep it. Because when I look at the grade book, it's not showing.
Total invoices,
So let me check.
total sales.
I should be able to see all of these ones that you guys submitted.
That looks like cost balance.
Okie dokie.
I want to do this, but I don't have time.
Yeah, don't worry, you guys. We'll get them all fixed as submitted, because I don't have that much experience with MindTap. So I went in this morning to delete your submissions and none of them showed up. So we'll see what it does, but we get all of our points resolved. I should be able to see what's going on with it. So watch for messages. If I get a hold of you, I might need you to try to submit something again, but I think we should be good. Let me check. I'll just go check the grade book real fast, see what it shows.
Oh, you need invoice, customer, and line. Ugh. I really don't have time for that.
See?
Are we keeping these? Are we?
Yes,
Yeah.
keep those.
Okay.
Keep those because you made them dermy. Now, let me see what's going on.
Someone one day is going to look into my bag and ask why I don't know what that was.
Yeah, it's letting you guys do attempt 2. I think you're going to have to do it attempt 2.
Oh, I didn't submit.
Submit attempt 2 because it does seem like it kept the first ones. I don't know why it didn't show me anything, but now it is. Now it's showing like 1 attempt for the people that have done 2. Oh, there, Greg, yours is showing 2.
Literally, my math class starts in 8 minutes.
Get out of here.
I didn't submit the thing.
Oh. I will probably be flexible.
I'm going to forget.
Mhm.
I have the
Do
memory
not
of a-
forget. I won't be that
memory of a
flexible
toaster.
unless I forget. So, Greg, yours is showing 66.7%. Did you submit all of them except for that one?
Well, I did yeah,
Or just the ones we did today?
just the ones we did today.
So
And then that first attempt is 9 through 13.
yeah, so I think that if I added them up, but I don't think it's going to do that. I'm afraid you're going to have to put them all in one attempt. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, that's fine.
Okay, I never submitted, but it's not going to let me submit. apparently.
But it's auto grading, by golly.
It genuinely says all but 19 are completed, and it just says submit 0%, and I can't submit it.
Well, at least we have a video.
When I moused over it, enabled the
I can't submit this.
Because it's deleted all history.
It says it's the tasks, even though I've already done them. I don't know, and I don't have time.
We'll figure it out, don't worry.
I can't.
Oh, find them. Oh, I can edit your score, so I might be able to add them up. Bye.
So, like,
Have math fun.
can you like see we did the problems, just not?
I'm not sure. Let me check. That's a good question.
My Cengage won't let me submit it again.
View. This is so weird. It's like
Can
like
you
it lets me
yeah,
see the very last one you
edit
did. But
score?
yes, I can see the green check mark by each of your problems. But I can't exactly see what you submitted. This is what I can see, Isaac. So it's like it's showing me some SQL, but I don't think I can make it change which SQL it's showing me.
What if, can you open a problem maybe, and I think it shows the query stage in each one,
Like this.
usually it says, yeah, if you click like the test, yeah, it says solution query.
There it is. Yeah, it's showing it to me. Yeah, I can see it. But it shows
You have to check.
19. That looks good. Because, yeah, I can tell. I can tell you've got them done. Every time I try to save time grading by auto grading, it ends up costing more time. Yeah, if it'll let you guys turn in one that's got everything. If it won't, I'll be trying to edit them and fix them. So we get it all fixed somehow. So just get it submitted and we'll get it graded. Have a great weekend. I'm stopping this thing.
Luckily, there's the video from last time.